going to go a little bit deeper today into the purpose for Daniel's 70 weeks. And we're going to look at, like, what's the role of the two witnesses? They have a 3.5-year ministry. Isn't that part of a 7-year tribulation that Daniel talks about in Daniel chapter 9:27? What I want to do is I want to read this passage here. Open up your ears and actually hear what it's saying. You're not going to hear anything about two witnesses in this passage. You're not going to hear anything about tribulation in this passage at all. It's just a very concise description of how God is going to use the Messiah to do a number of things. Now, I've gone over this in a video series that I'm going to leave the link to, and you can watch that video series, and I'm actually going to go over my Bible study method. Now, you have to understand, I am not a seminary graduate. I don't even have a college degree. I'm just a housewife who does Bible studies, and I'm putting them out there, and you can do with them whatever you choose. Okay, you can like me, not like me, think I'm right, think I'm wrong. Doesn't matter. I'm putting this stuff out, and part of it is as a challenge to you to get you to think about the things that you believe. Just because somebody handed you something like there's a 7-year tribulation and we get that from Daniel 9:27 does not mean that that's necessarily true. So let's just read those 3 verses, Daniel 9:24 through 27. 70 weeks are decreed for your people and for your holy city to stop their transgression, to put an end to sin, to make atonement for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. Know and understand this. From the issuance of the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince, there will be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. It will be rebuilt with streets and a trench, but in times of distress. Then after the 62 weeks, the Messiah will be cut off and will have nothing. Then the people of the prince who is to come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. The end will come with a flood, and until the end there will be war. Desolations have been decreed. And he will confirm a covenant with many for 1 week, but in the middle of the week he will put an end to sacrifice and offering. And on the wing of the temple will come the abomination that causes desolation until the decreed destruction is poured out upon him. There's nothing about two witnesses in this passage. There's nothing that says anything about like tribulation in that 70th week, which is the one that starts with, he will confirm a covenant for 1 week. And that the purpose of the 70 weeks of years is all the things that we read about in verse 24. And it's about the Jews. Okay, so this 70 weeks is about Israel. It's about the Jews, and it's not about believers. Okay, so like we're not in this picture particularly. We are by extension because the promises of Israel are coming to us as believers. But this is actually a prophecy for Israel. So believers are not in this, right? That's important to understand. The other thing that we need to understand is that God is going to use the Messiah, the coming of the Messiah, to do all those things that he talked about, putting an end to sin, that is, putting an end to the sin problem. And all of this is really from God's perspective. He's the one that wants the atonement for people. He's the one that wants to bring sin to an end. He's the one that wants to bring Israel's rebellion to an end. What God is going to do, it's his program, and he's laying out his program here for redemption for Israel, and it's through the Messiah. And it's over the course of 70 weeks of years, or 490 basically sabbatical years. So one of those things that Jesus is going to do, that the Messiah is going to do in God's program, is put an end to sin, that is, an end to the sin problem, and atone for iniquity. When I put out this poll the other day of how many people thought that it was Jesus who was going to put an end to sin through his crucifixion and so on. Just about everybody, said, yeah, that's right. Okay, so here's the deal. During that 70 weeks, we need to find the method whereby God brought atonement for his people. The atonement is through Christ's death on the cross. That needs to be a part of the 70 weeks. We need to find that within the 70 weeks. So the Jews in Jesus' day would be able to calculate the coming of the Messiah by knowing when this decree went forth, just, doing the right number of years and so on. So I'm going to leave a link to a subscriber of mine who is a very, very smart man. And he actually has spent a lot of time delving into this whole, when was the decree? I mean, he's a researcher. He does this sort of thing. And then he gave his results to me, and really they're mind-boggling. I hope you'll take a look at that paper that I'm linking to. It's just a really short one-page paper. So from the research that Mark Wilburn has done here, he was able to show that Ezra began the construction of the city and so on in 456 BC and completed it 409 BC. So that's when that first sabbatical cycle, 7 weeks of years or 49 years, ended. And then we begin another 62 weeks of years. And that brings you to the fall then of 27 AD. This brings us to the first coming of Christ, to the coming of John the Baptist, to the beginning of Jesus' ministry. So Jesus ministered for 3.5 years. And remember, he did more than die on the cross. For 3.5 years, he was training 12 men to take on his ministry after he would die, resurrect, and ascend into heaven. So Jesus' first coming was between 27 AD and 31 AD when he died and resurrected and ascended. So that's when he put an end to sacrifice and offering. Listen to what it says. He will confirm a covenant with many for 1 week. So Jesus confirmed this covenant for 1 week, but in the middle of the week, he put an end to sacrifice and offering, and that's when he died. That's when he made atonement for iniquity. That's when he put an end to sin. Okay, and that is when there's this and. Okay, there's this and in the story that separates the first half of Christ's coming, his first coming to redeem people, and his second coming, which is all about the bringing in everlasting righteousness and sealing up vision and prophet and so on. All of that's going to happen at the second coming of Christ when he comes as the king. That will start with the abomination of desolation, okay? On the wing of abominations will come one who makes desolate. That's the Antichrist. And he'll be here for 3.5 years or 42 months or 1,260 days. So the end times, remember, it's for Israel. Okay, in Daniel's 70th week, this is about Israel. And really, it's about Jesus. And it's about God's plan for redemption. So Christ came and was here for 3.5 years, 2,000 years ago. From 27 AD to 31 AD. If we're raptured this fall, okay, if we go this year in 2023, it means the abomination of desolation will start in 2024, and the second coming of Christ will be in 2027 AD, exactly 2,000 years after his first coming. Okay, so now people ask me, well, what about the two witnesses? Where are they? Aren't they part of a 7 years thing? Aren't they part of the 7-year tribulation? Okay, you have to understand 7-year tribulation isn't found anywhere in the Bible. The tribulation part, people just throw that in there. We know there's going to be 3.5 years of great tribulation for Israel, but what's coming before that, we don't know. And people go, well, aren't there 3.5 years before the abomination of desolation? Well, there's actually more. There's more than 3.5 years, according to the book of Revelation, which is written for believers and not for Israel. So this plan right here is Israel's plan. We have a different one, but they coincide. And they'll actually coincide pretty much right about the time of the abomination. Okay, so what does it look like on this side of the abomination of desolation if you're a believer? Okay, How much time is over here? Well, I'm just going to erase this right here so we don't get confused. All right, so right here is where the abomination of desolation will take place. And that's when the last half of the 70th week of Daniel will commence. My understanding is that the two witnesses are going to actually resurrect and ascend into heaven on this day. This is the second woe. And this is when there's a big earthquake in Israel. This is when the remnant will flee, and for 1,260 days, okay? And then Christ returns right here. This is all known. I mean, it isn't like this is mysterious. This is something that a lot of people teach, okay? There's nothing new here about this. But what I'm suggesting is that over here on this side, there are events that take place, but they're not part of what's happening with Israel. What's happening with Israel won't start until the abomination of desolation. This is when the man of sin is revealed. He's revealed because he goes into the temple of God proclaiming that he's God. That happens right here. He's not revealed at some, signing a peace covenant or something like that. That's not scriptural. Paul tells us he's revealed because he goes into the temple of God proclaiming that he's God. All right, so the two witnesses are going to be killed 3.5 days before they resurrect and ascend. And the two witnesses will have had a 1,260-day ministry. Okay? And people go, well, but Brenda, there's 3.5 years over here, and there's 3.5 years over here. Isn't that 7 years of tribulation? No. The tribulation does not start for Israel until the abomination of desolation. Okay? That's when that great tribulation will start, according to Jesus in Matthew 24. And according to, Revelation, other places, this is when the remnant of Israel will flee into the wilderness. So how will the remnant of Israel know to flee? How will the 144,000 know to receive Christ? It's because the two witnesses, that's their job. Their job is with Israel, okay? So kind of during the last days, just before the abomination of desolation, there's two tracks that are running, okay? This is the track for Israel, where the two witnesses are ministering to the nation of Israel, to the people who will become among the 144,000 of Israel believers, and to the remnant of Israel who needs to know this information. They need to know that when certain events happen, they need to flee. Okay, this is the job of the two witnesses. They're preparing Israel to receive Christ, whether to receive Christ by faith as a believer or whether they're part of the group that's going to be ushered into the wilderness as non-believers. They're not believers in Christ, but they're following him for whatever reason. Okay, so we've got basically 3.5 years over here, right? We actually have more time, all right, because the Revelation 12 sign happened back here in 2017. All right, now if we're raptured this fall, it means the two witnesses arrived in 2020. Okay, 2017 is like 3 years before that. So the amount of time before this event is actually more than 3.5 years. We're talking 7 years between 2017 and the abomination of desolation. 7 years, okay? And Israel has a track that they're going on, but believers have one too. Okay, and ours started in 2017. This was when the sign showed up that we read about in Revelation. Revelation is the book for believers, okay? The Jews are not reading Revelation. We got our wake-up call back here with the sign of the woman that appeared in heaven. The next sign we're looking for is the sign of the dragon. Hopefully that's this year, 2023. There's 10 years between 2017 and 2027. It's 10 years, okay? It's not 7. But tribulation does not start until the abomination of desolation, although Revelation tells us that terrible things are going to happen to believers before this point in time. And once this point in time occurs, then terrible things are going to happen for Israel and any believers who are still here, right? That's when the Great Tribulation begins. There's actually 10 days of tribulation that's going to happen over on this side. And before the 10 days of tribulation, which are where the fifth seal martyrs are killed, there's going to be the seals 1 through 4 and trumpets 1 through 5. And the second woe right here is the sixth trumpet. Daniel's only talking about Israel. It's not talking about us. And if Jesus came to Israel for 3.5 years during his first coming, he died on the cross, he atoned for iniquity, that's done. That first half of Daniel's 70th week is over. The second half of Daniel's 70th week, right here, has to do with the second coming of Christ. And in between, there's this gap. There's a gap. There's a gap of 2,000 years. And if Jesus began his ministry in 27 AD, and he has a second coming in 2027 AD, that's 2,000 years. I'm not sure why people want to calculate this stuff actually from the crucifixion of Christ, because his ministry began 3.5 years before his crucifixion. In John 17, Jesus is giving an account of his stewardship to his Father, and he's just talking about these men that he taught and he trained, and he gave them God's word, and he didn't lose any except the son of perdition. This is an account of his ministry. His ministry to those apostles was a huge part of what he came for. Where would we be if Jesus just came and died on the cross and ascended into heaven? And if we didn't know about it, what's the point? So the 12 apostles, training them, helping get the leaven of the bad teaching out of them, was part of the story here. It's part of the ministry of Christ. So in the end times, there's actually a ministry to Israel prior to the abomination of desolation. That's when the two witnesses come. They minister in Israel. They're ministering to the people who will be among the 144,000 of Israel. They're ministering to the people who will be part of the remnant that flees into the wilderness. And so I've said before, in some ways, it kind of doesn't matter about us because they're not ministering over here in the United States. They're not ministering in Australia. They're pretty much ministering in Israel. That's pretty much where they are. And they're ministering at the same time we are. Okay, and this is the other thing, is people think that our ministry and the ministry of the two witnesses can't overlap. They can overlap. John the Baptist's ministry and Christ's ministry overlapped. You would think that John the Baptist would come and then Jesus would start, and that there'd be a nice clean break there, but that's not how these things go. There's an overlapping as one era of time comes in and another one is getting ready to leave. So there's a pattern that's already established for this stuff. I'll be going over the seals, okay, in a subsequent video. But I wanted to talk about this because Daniel 9 does not say anything about tribulation at all. It talks about the wing of abominations, someone will come who makes desolate, but never uses the word tribulation, never uses the word wrath. God's wrath is never seen as being poured out on the world here. There is nothing, zero, in that passage that talks about seals, trumpets, bowls, the wrath of God being poured out on the world, about any of the stuff that we read about in Revelation. It's because this is for Israel. Okay, the 70 weeks is about Israel. It's about their Messiah. The Messiah's life, death, and resurrection needs to be somewhere in the 70 weeks, not in a gap. All right? So the actual time before this last half of tribulation, and this is Great Tribulation, Jesus called it that, there's actually like 7 years, not 3.5, that take place before the abomination of desolation. That's if there's a rapture this fall, and 2024 is when the abomination takes place. I've shown in other videos how the things that we read about in Revelation, about the first seals and the first trumpets and so on, all are going to happen in a very compressed period of time. But if we leave this year, the two witnesses are already here doing their thing. Their job, according to Malachi, is to turn the hearts of fathers to the children and children to the fathers. That is, bring them back to a center where God is, the center of everything. This is about going back to the faith again. That is what these two witnesses, that's their job. Their job is not standing on the street corners and calling fire down or plagues. That will happen, but it'll happen as at the end of their 3-year ministry, and as that last part of their ministry, which is the public ministry, when that starts. And again, John the Baptist is an example of this. He had a somewhat private ministry out in the wilderness. You had to actually go out into the wilderness if you wanted to hear him. But later on, he was accusing Herod of sleeping with his brother's wife and marrying her, and that's very public. Okay, and he got his head removed for doing that. When prophets come on the scene, they don't always minister publicly. They have a private job to do. They do things kind of in secret, where it's unknown. People don't necessarily know what's going on. And they also can have a public ministry. But when they go public, it usually doesn't go well for them. So that time frame of public ministry is usually quite limited. Case in point would be John the Baptist and even Elijah, okay, in the Old Testament. All right, so I hope you can see where I'm coming from here and kind of understand the fine points, and don't read something into the passage that isn't there. There is no tribulation words. There's no wrath words. There's nothing like that in the Daniel passage. I'm going to read it for you one more time and see if you can hear anything that has to do with the wrath of God, tribulation, or anything. And he will confirm a covenant with many for 1 week, but in the middle of the week, he will put an end to sacrifice and offering. And I want to just sort of bring you back to putting an end to something. There's several words, Hebrew words you can use about putting an end to something. And the word here is the word meaning rest, where we get the word Sabbath. He is putting the sacrifices and offering to rest. They're done. Okay. And on the wing of the temple will come the abomination that causes desolation until the decreed destruction is poured out on him. All right, so leave a comment in the comment section. We'll see you on another video. Till then, have a blessed day.